Hi. So this time I just wanted to make a quick video, perhaps giving some tips as to how to apply or represent combat techniques in role-playing games, because I've seen some descriptions of combat in books that some are really good and you know that the author knows what he's talking about, but some others seem a bit ridiculous. And just today I saw a somewhat related video, not as much, but I think there is a bit of a misconception in a particular technique. Well, let's talk about some of the over the top fantasy techniques that I've seen. Well, basically, I'm just going to talk about one because at the moment that's the one that seems more specific to me as, let's say, over the top or flourishy technique that actually could serve in a real combat situation. And that's in one of the Dritz books. I think he actually uses that technique a few times. In Dritz, you know, the Dark Elf from Dungeons and Dragons from Forgotten Realms. When I first read or saw that technique in one of R.A. Salvatore's books, I became a bit like curious about it because it seemed quite spectacular. And when I read that many years ago, when I was first getting into martial arts, like 20 years ago, more or less, and I saw a technique and I thought, wow, is that even possible? But I didn't have too much knowledge back then. And when I went up some grades in my training, I decided to try it out, and I was pleasantly surprised that that technique actually works. And there is, let me use these practice sticks. As you well know, Dritz Dourden uses a couple of scimitars in his fighting technique, and in different moments throughout different books, sometimes the opponents attack with an upward strike. They have their sword down and they cut upwards, or I think at times it was a low thrust as well, and that gave trouble. That gave Dritz some trouble when he was first learning how to fight, when he trained with his with Sagnafane, and eventually he came up with a technique which is the lower cross guard with both of the scimitars. So when I first read about that, I wanted to try it out. So I want to give you like an example of how it's supposed to work. Sorry, because I know I should have get a better camera. When I can, I'm going to get a better camera for sure, and a tripod perhaps. And he basically does this when someone is about to do an upward strike or thrust. Dritz is supposed to basically do this. He does a cross guard, putting all of his weight in the downward. That would be a cross guard, and almost immediately, as he does this, he is supposed to kick with his foot. So let's do this in slow motion. I don't think the camera will capture the movement as better as good as I would hope, but here it goes. So he's supposed to do this, and then he kicks between his guard at the opponent's chest or his face, depending. For example, if he's fighting dark dwarves, he will obviously kick the head of the opponent. So he basically would do this in real speed. And of course, he will have to rely on the element of surprise, otherwise the opponent would see it coming. And even though it's quite an over-the-top fighting technique, I think it could actually work in a particular situation, because I've actually done it, but not with sticks. I've done it with my hands. When somebody tried to attack me with a, how would you say in English, a hook towards the stomach, I usually did this. That is, the opponent's arm is going to get captured between my arms, and I usually turn it aside and counter with whatever I want to do. Now I'm going to talk about a misconception about parrying, because I saw a video right now and I think there is a bit of confusion when it comes to blocking and parrying. I just checked Wikipedia, and that is why I do not trust Wikipedia. It actually lists parry as a blocking, as a type of blocking, and no, it's not the same thing. Here I have my Webster's Desk Dictionary of the English language, and let's look at the definition of parry. It says, parry, to ward off as in fencing, to turn aside by an adroit evasion. So, the act or an instance of parrying. So the difference between blocking and parrying is that blocking is terrible. Well, you will have to do that in certain situations. And for example, if we're talking about medieval type of combat, they're going to use their shield to block, of course. But blocking usually takes a toll on your arms terribly. If your opponent is really strong, that's the best way to ruin your arms, if you're constantly blocking. And for example, if you're fighting, let's say 2 or 3 people, when you're fighting 2 or 3 people, if you constantly block, you're not going to be able to feel your arms, trust me. So, for example, this would be block. You'll be putting your arm to see if you can use it as a shield. It's better to use the elbow in those emergency situations, but even so, there are some fragile areas around the elbow that can be exploited. So that's an error. You should avoid blocking as much as possible. And we'll get into how it plays into sword play in a few minutes. The best thing to do is to parry. And so, for example, if you get attacked with a fist or with a kick, it's much better to parry the attack, not use force against force, but rather deviation. And now let me talk about the errors that some people fall into. Some people think that you are only blocking, you are only parrying with your arms, but you are parrying with your whole body. You're not just moving your arms like this, you're moving your entire body when you do that to parry. It depends on where you are parrying. You can parry over here and over there, so it depends. And now I'm going to give you an example, but before that, because I just saw a video when they actually recommended that if somebody was attacking you with a full force, let's say using this X-Acto knife, that you should block with full force, but it's a lot better through the use of positioning, sidestepping, and with the coordination of your arms and body to sidestep and parry, actually parry, not block, parry, and that way it's also possible to protect the edge of a blade. I know that many exaggerate that, you should never use the edge to protect yourself, and that's foolish, because you must always protect your life if it were to be like a self-defense situation. I know that nowadays you do not use swords to fight. Usually you use, it depends on the place and your profession, usually employ knives or machetes or machetes, as they say in English. So it's better, there is a way to use the flat of the blade to deviate the blows, because if, for example, if it's going like this, the sword attack, you shouldn't block it like this. It's a lot better to parry it from the side. And I'm going to give you an example of how to do this, and both using like one sword and 2 swords. So for example, let's use a single blade. And remember, you're using the entire body, you're not just standing like, no, you're going to be using your whole body. Well, in the case of an opponent using his entire strength to attack you, that's usually like a telltale or a way to telegraph his intention, and it's usually better to counter with a quicker attack. So for example, let's say that I already know, it's based on an experience and your studies as well of martial arts, you know exactly, you kind of sense a bit of the intention of the opponent. It's not perfect, but when you can actually do that, it's better to counter quickly. So, and as you can see, I didn't do like, no, I did it really fast. And another important point, it's usually good form to keep your head straight, but do not sacrifice that if it's going to end up hurting you, because sometimes you are not perfect in your execution and your head is in the way and you're not going to be focused on keeping a perfect form, you're actually going to be more focused on getting your head out of the way. So there will be some moments where you have to like duck a bit. When you do that, it's okay. But now I'm going to give you an example on how to parry and strike immediately. This is the slow motion. Let's say my opponent is attacking me with a downward or diagonal slash or cut. So I would step with my front leg to the side and let it drag the foot behind. So I would do like this, but at the same time that I do that, I'm going to parry, deviating with the flat of my blade if possible the attack of the opponent. After I do that, he is going to end up in a very unbalanced position. Especially if you can do something that is known in martial arts as ride the sword, which is really useful against opponents who are constantly like poking you with their swords. You can ride the sword to close the distance, but that's you need quite a bit of experience and good body conditioning to do that, so keep that in mind. So, for example, right here I'm going to parry and strike. I'm going to do it, let's say, in normal speed. As you could see, I moved to the side, I parried, and I cut the parry, and then moving to the side is almost simultaneous. Sorry. And there is another variation. You could actually do this, and if perhaps you were a bit clumsy in your execution in a self-defense situation, you will have to resort to your hands, because maybe I did parry my opponent, but I hesitated a bit and my sword is over here, and I thought that at the moment I try to do this, he's going to perhaps back away and counter or strike in some other way. You will have to use your hands. You could use your hands to secure your opponent's arms and perhaps try to stab his neck. But you could also, for example, connect with an elbow. And I would recommend that you always keep secure or check the arms of the opponent, because even though he's like this, he can also back away and cut backwards, and he could end up killing you in a real situation. So once you manage to parry, you have several options. You can even go for the neck or the eyes to give you like a momentary advantage and do this. But if you know martial arts, you're going to know how to strike and how to kill the opponent with your bare hands. That is a trademark of a true martial artist. So another way that you can do this parry, and this one is a bit more a clumsy way in my opinion, would be to parry, and let's say that you didn't get enough time to do this cut, or your hands ended up in an awkward position, or your arms, you could immediately parry and keep going in the same direction, because maybe you sidestepped a bit too far away and I'm like, whoa, I didn't want to end up over here. What do? I keep going and I cut. Obviously it's the head of the opponent that's going to be the target, so that's a way to take advantage of the parry and the parry. And you could say, but what if my opponent cuts horizontally? Well, when the opponent cuts horizontally, it's a lot better to attack vertically as fast as possible. But it all depends, because, for example, if the opponent tries to go for a really low cut, let's say to your legs, it depends on your distance. It is actually possible to check his attack or nullify it in a better way with your legs. When you're actually doing this and you're pretty fast with a kick, you can stomp. You can sometimes even stomp the weapon out of your opponent's hands. So this doesn't have to do with parrying, but in case your opponent wanted to do like a lower cut, kick his hands or the what would you call this? The pommel of his sword, and then strike with your weapon. But let's say that the opponent is going for your head or your chest in an horizontal way. You could do this. You could parry upwards, and then it depends on how he ends up. If he was made a really strong cut or strike, his sword is going to end up over there. So this will give you a chance to back away slightly and cut But if you parry like this and your opponent, let's say he didn't commit all of his weight into the attack, he may hold like this and he notices the parry and he opens up a bit, well, you could immediately thrust, and you could also check his arm with your other hand and stab him. Or you could use this, that is even faster, elbowing him and securing as fast as possible his arm, if possible. There is never a sure way to know what the opponent is going to do. You have to react in a matter of seconds. Many of you already know this. So those are just a few ways in which you can use parrying, that is not clashing of power, but rather when the cut is coming, you push it to the side through the position of your body, through understanding of the mechanics of the positioning and using your weight to your advantage. And this is even easier at times when you use two swords. You need to know what you are doing, of course, but imagine now this is even easier if you know how to parry. The moment you parry the opponent's weapon to the side, body positioning and weight, you cut immediately with your other arm. Maybe he attacks over here, you do the same thing. Maybe he wants to go for the horizontal strike, parry attack, or thrust. Or maybe he wants to go for a lower strike. You could also kick like I was telling you, but another also effective way is to swat his hands. It all depends on your movements, of course. If you will not be able to measure, you don't have confidence in closing in on the distance, you will have to back away and perhaps, for example, he's over here, he's cutting really low and you have no confidence in closing the distance, back away a bit, block immediately so that his sword doesn't return, because he's going to be doing this, and in order for him not to do this backwards cut, block it with your, that's a good way of doing the block and strike. But let's say, for example, if the opponent is cutting you horizontally and to the chest or to the head, that's perfect for a parry. And remember, the important thing is to duck at the same time, because if you're like, oh, I have complete confidence in just using my arms, maybe you're not strong enough to parry and he's going to end up, maybe he doesn't cut your neck, but he hurts your head. So that's why we need to duck and perhaps tuck our head a bit as we deviate. So the parry is going to give you those extra inches to avoid the opponent and to stop ourselves from hurting our arms. That is not clashing strength versus strength. If you're always clashing strength versus strength, the stronger opponent is going to win. You're going to end up wrecking yourself. So those are just some things that I would like to point out when you want to carry out RPG descriptions of battle and combat, because there are some ridiculous moments at times. I've mentioned this in one of my videos when I had this terrible game master and I was playing as a monk, and when I described some martial arts moves that I've used in my personal protection or self-defense, that game master was like, oh, that's not possible. And it's actually quite funny because he actually had like a fight club. Maybe they fought like in a really thuggish and unrefined way, so it was really annoying that he didn't approve of that description. So I hope this sword play, or somewhat clumsy depiction of how to use parrying and some flashy moves from Dritz the Orden. And the funny thing is that R.A. Salvatore was actually a bouncer, so you can tell from that description, and because of the different ways he uses economy of movement and some other methods in Dritz combat, you know that he knows his stuff when it comes to physical confrontations. So again, I hope this, what would you say, explanation serves to better describe combat scenes in role-playing games. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.